further north, above average across Scotland. But obviously it doesn't feel that mild because it is still very windy. As the winds ease off further, we could see some pockets of frost across northeast Scotland. Turns quite chilly across eastern England overnight with clear skies, but the next set of weather fronts will move in from the west, bringing rain and drizzle, and eventually they'll start to lift the temperatures. So certainly in the west, we're well above freezing by dawn. But some more heavy rain and strong winds come into western Scotland in the morning. That rain will spread southwards, could be very heavy for a time across northwest England, North Wales, particularly through Tuesday morning's rush hour. That band of rain kind of eases off as it spreads southwards, so a spell of damp weather for the Midlands and then East Anglia in the southeast through the early afternoon before skies start to brighten and we see sunny spells. A few showers across western Scotland, in particular over the hills. There will be of snow here, but again, for many it turns quite bright, but still quite breezy in the afternoon. Through Tuesday evening, we'll see a few more of those showers coming into Northern Ireland, northwest England, particularly western Scotland, with more snow on the hills. Clearer spells further south, and the weather continuing to chop and change this week. It'll often be windy, but not as stormy. There'll be spells of rain, but also most of us will see some sunnier days as well. Goodbye.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues that we need to look at in depth. Nothing is off the table and nobody will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is Sean Bailey, former Conservative candidate for London Mayor, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. Boris Johnson is expected to lift all COVID restrictions in England. His opponents say it's a smokescreen to distract from Partygate, while others scream, "At last!" Is this really the beginning of the end? Plus, another week and more last-ditch efforts to avert war in Ukraine. We'll look at the latest developments in the escalating tensions between Russia and Ukraine. And Britain's being battered by yet another storm. What's the damage, and are there more storms to come? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. Let me know what you think. Is it too soon to lift COVID restrictions? Is there anything else you need to talk about? Email me gbnews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me @gbnews. First, it's time for the GB News headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, a cabinet meeting in which Boris Johnson was due to outline his blueprint for how to live with COVID to his colleagues has been delayed until later on this afternoon. Ministers had arrived at number 10 ahead of the meeting, but it was postponed at short notice. The Prime Minister is expected to remove all remaining domestic COVID regulations in England by the end of this week, including mandatory isolation after a positive test. The British Medical Association said that would be an odd decision. Virologist Dr. Chris Smith says even without legal restrictions, people should be encouraged to use common sense.
At the end of the day, if you've got gastroenteritis and norovirus, you generally don't go to work. You don't send your kid to nursery. There's no legal framework that says if you do, you're going to get prosecuted. That's what they're removing, the legal framework, but hopefully the learning, the common sense, the ability to make decisions and risk assess that we've actually become pretty good at doing over the course of the pandemic. That remains in play.
Union leaders have criticised potential government plans to charge for COVID tests, calling it an act of madness. The TUC is urging the Prime Minister to put public health first. They claim it will disproportionately hit frontline and low-paid workers during a time when the cost of living is on the rise. Well, the Business Minister, Paul Scully, says the £2 billion per month government spending on COVID tests could be better used. In other news now, environment agencies have issued hundreds of alerts for flooding as Storm Franklin continues to sweep across the UK. It follows yellow weather warnings that have been in place since this morning. Many of them have now been removed. Transport networks have been suffering further delays. Some train operators have been asking passengers not to travel because of the conditions. 32,000 homes are currently still without power following the previous storm, Storm Eunice, over the weekend. The Prime Minister's spokesman says intelligence suggests Russia intends to launch an invasion of Ukraine and that President Putin's plan has, in effect, already begun. Downing Street added, a window for diplomacy still remains to prevent war in Europe. US President Joe Biden has agreed in principle to talks with Vladimir Putin as long as Russia holds off an attack. The Kremlin says there are no concrete plans, but the leaders could meet or talk. Russia's military says that this morning their troops and guards prevented a diversionary reconnaissance group from Ukraine from breaching its border and that 5 people have been killed. Ukraine rejected the claims, describing them as fake news, and said its forces aren't in the region of the alleged incident. Australia welcomes tourists back today after nearly 2 years. Vaccinated travellers can travel to the country after some of the world's strictest pandemic measures have been lifted. Australian citizens and international students were allowed to return to Australia from November last year. Most tourists, though, had to wait. Well, travel editor at The Independent, Simon Calder, travelled to Sydney today. He says there were no tourists on his flights and that paperwork might be putting people off.
I had to fill in an incredibly complicated form. I had to be double jabbed. I had to take a lateral flow test in the 24 hours before getting on board. Really tough stuff. They desperately need us back. It's a question of whether, having had that big keep out sign for a couple of years, people have kind of forgotten about Australia.
There's a new drive to help uncover Britain's working class history. Historic England have announced that local communities can apply for grants of up to £25,000 to fund research projects. Well, the aim is to find out more about everyday history in places like railways, our council estates and pubs. The project is the first of a series planned for the next 3 years, aiming to explore the diversity of England's heritage. You're now up to date here on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, let's head to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
When news rippled in a series of alerts and tweets last night that our 95-year-old Queen had contracted COVID, few would have mustered little more than a brief exchange over Sunday roast. A year ago, that reaction would have been dramatically different. The nation would have been gripped by hysteria. The fact that this news is not dominating headlines is symbolic of how far we've come in tackling COVID, ahead of the government unveiling plans today to remove all restrictions in England so that we may learn to live with the virus. While many applaud the move, making England a world leader in coming out of the other side of the pandemic, with supportive scientists saying the date of this seminal moment is relatively immaterial, others are warning that it sends out the wrong message that the risk of COVID has been eliminated. With opposition benches pushing back against the suggestion that free COVID testing could be withdrawn, the Health Secretary and Chancellor have been locked in discussions, delaying Cabinet's approval of the plans ahead of the Prime Minister once again joining Sir Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance behind the COVID lecterns this evening. But could this be for the very last time? Joining me first on the show is Labour MP for Blackley and Broughton, Graham Stringer. Graham, what do you think about the idea that all COVID restrictions could be lifted?
I think if we think who's at risk at the present time, it's people with damaged immune systems, it's the very old, it's the people who've always been most at risk during this epidemic. Most of the rest of us, including the Queen, are relatively safe because we've been vaccinated or we already had the disease. So carrying on with the restrictions and spending oodles of money on unnecessary testing, particularly of children, and vaccinating children unnecessarily, which is probably damaging them in schools, I think we should finish and get back to a more or less normal life. I think we should still allow testing for those people who are likely to come into contact with the vulnerable groups I've just mentioned, because those people need protecting. But most of the rest of us are less at risk from this disease at the moment than we would be from flu.
Now, your party is pushing back against the suggestion that free COVID testing could be scrapped, and that's actually led for this protracted meeting that's delayed Cabinet approval of proposals between the Chancellor and the Health Secretary, where we understand that free testing may still be available, but it won't be from an extra budget, a surplus budget provided by the Exchequer. Do you think that's the right move, or do you think we should just get rid of free testing altogether?
Well, I think, as I've said, free testing that will protect the vulnerable members of our community is the right thing to do. Those people who are often old or they've been in hospital for a long time or have just come out of hospital need to have every facility they can to protect themselves, and that must include testing. But the ridiculous amount of testing that goes on in schools and for everywhere else, I mean, does it matter if you've got COVID with mild symptoms? The disease itself can be transmitted when you've not got symptoms or when you've got symptoms. I think we've just got to learn to live with this disease. And as the person who came on previously, use common sense. If you've got the disease and you've got symptoms, stay at home. Try not to give it to somebody else, as you would do with flu or other viruses like the Nora virus. I think we can use common sense and our own judgment on this, so long as we protect those people who the disease might still kill.
I mean, there are people from the medical and scientific communities who are saying potentially this is coming way too soon. This could be a political move to distract from other issues that the Prime Minister has. Do you think that perhaps, we haven't heard from Sage, I think we're going to hear from them potentially this evening in a coronavirus press conference, perhaps our last, who knows. But does that alarm you that we haven't heard these proposals yet to be backed up by other members of the scientific and medical community who have been advising the government to date?
Not really. I mean, if you read the weekend's papers, you can read the best advice available from a number of epidemiologists, virologists, the person you had on your programme earlier. There are a range of views, some more protective, some more let's get back to normal views. So I don't think there's any scarcity of the views. I don't trust the Prime Minister. I have no doubt his motives are for his own survival, not for the protection of the public. But looking at that advice, I'm a member of the Science and Technology Committee, and I've followed this epidemic all the way through. And I think at nearly every stage, the government has spent a great deal of money and wasted it, not on protecting the most at-risk people, but on protecting themselves by frightening the public and taking too many restrictive measures. And I think that's what the scientific evidence indicates at the moment. The vast anybody who wants to be vaccinated can be vaccinated. People who've already had the disease, they are pretty well protected. We all know that.
And if we are coming towards the end of, pandemic measures in this country, what is your appraisal of how we've dealt with this? Because arguably, the UK was the first country to vaccinate anybody, and it seems to me that England, at least, is going to be one of the first countries in the developed world to say goodbye to the coronavirus and see the light at the end of the tunnel.
I think the one bright spot in dealing with this epidemic has been the development very, very quickly, much more quickly than it's ever been done in history before, of effective vaccines. And I think we should be proud of our scientific community in being able to produce those safe vaccines that have worked so well. But if you read the National Audit Office report of the test and trace system, huge billions and billions of pounds have been wasted on that system for no effect. People were sent back into care homes untested, which led to the spread of the disease. We locked down people who weren't vulnerable to the disease. People over 70 are thousands of times more vulnerable to the disease than people in the 20s. But we damaged children by not educating them. We damaged children by not letting them socialise. And we locked up people and damaged the economy. And the government has not ever told us what both the health and economic consequences of those over-restrictions have been. So I think there's a big gold star for the scientific community and the government on vaccines, and there's a delta minus really for the rest of it in how the epidemic has been dealt with. They've restricted people who didn't need to be restricted and not protected those people who needed to be protected.
Graham, thank you ever so much. Lovely talking to you on my programme today. What do you think about all of this? Are you ready to get back out there and get back to the old normal? Well, GB News East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has been out in Nottingham today to find out your thoughts about the end of COVID restrictions.
It's time to move on because it's not going to go away. But on buses and enclosed environments, I think it's still a little bit uncomfortable for people. And even for myself, I feel a bit uncomfortable. But I'm vaccinated, so therefore I feel health-wise, I'm okay, and we need to perhaps continue that moving on.
We have to live with the virus, but other thing, can we trust people not to infect other people? So it's a question of responsibility of other people. If they test positive or if they have symptoms, that they be very, very responsible. You know what I mean? So I think just showing a blank canvas out there could be a bit of a wrong message. I think there should be somewhere where people should be responsible, you know what I mean? But we can't guarantee that.
You can't keep going on forever isolating, but then again, if you don't isolate, then we're going to go on forever, aren't we, sort of thing. So I don't know how to come to an arrangement with that, to be honest.
I think they should still keep the rules going. You should still have to wear your mask and that. Because I would not go anywhere without it. Never do. And I think you should keep the rules going. Really do.
Dangerous. Utterly dangerous. You don't know who's got it. I mean, do you go around with a big notice on, I've got COVID? No, you don't. You self-isolate, you take yourself away and look after it, after yourself. I've done it.
Well, Sean Bailey joins me now, the former Conservative candidate for London Mayor and the former chair of the Police and Crime Committee for the London Assembly. Sean, I mean, you heard some people being interviewed there in our Vox Pops that they just don't seem to be ready for restrictions to be lifted. Graham Stringer agreeing with the lifting of restrictions, it seems he'd want them to have been lifted sooner, but suggesting that this could be a diversionary tactic by Boris Johnson to save his ailing premiership.
I think there's two things to be said. Firstly, dealing with COVID is separate from what goes in Parliament. If you're a PM, you'll always have something big to deal with. I think we do need to move on from the restrictions because of the cost of the restrictions. And let's be clear, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about the other societal costs, people losing jobs, young people not getting the work experience they need, and of course the huge backlog on the NHS that needs to be dealt with. And every time you put in restrictions, you make sure those things aren't done. And when we listened to the Labour MP, he forgot to mention how in favour of lockdowns the rest of the Labour Party were. They wanted to lock down everything all the time. But as a country, we are now reaping the reward of all the hard work we've done. We spent billions of pounds of our collective money, and we've also had 2 lockdowns, and we wear masks everywhere, all manner of things. And at some point, that had to come to an end. And because we've been so good with the rules, I think that time is probably now.
It's a problem here that the government, like many other governments, might have essentially created a sort of mass Stockholm syndrome because they had to use extremely strident messaging to make people follow the restrictions while they were in place. And now there are people there who, are frightened. They're very alarmed that these restrictions are suddenly disappearing.
In a sense, you are correct. The government had to use some very forceful messages in the beginning because people simply didn't believe it. We had no experience of a pandemic, so we had to really push the message. And the same will be on this end. There'll be a tail end. There'll be a long tail of people coming back to normality. But that doesn't mean you don't change it. At some point, you do need to say to people, we are removing the restrictions. And of course, the public are clever. We've been dealing with illnesses for years. Most people have dealt with COVID through pure common sense, and that's how they'll deal with changing the rules, pure common sense. If you are ill, you will check why you're ill and you won't go to work, you won't go to school. We don't need the government to tell us how to behave. We're grown-ups, we know what we're doing.
I mean, the tug of war seems to be over the concept of free tests here, and we understand there have been a protracted meeting with the Chancellor and the Health Secretary to discuss that, with seemingly Sajid Javid wanting the free testing to go ahead and Sunak saying, well, look, if that's what you want, it's got to come out of your own budget, we're not going to give you any more money. The UK spent more on free tests than foreign aid. Do you think that was the right move, or do you think it's almost just led to this virtue signalling where there are people out there testing every single day and putting it on Twitter for apparently no reason?
Look, we've spent what we spent. We were in unprecedented times, and you could argue that we could have spent a little less or a little more. The point is, we are now going forward dealing with COVID in the same way we would deal with the flu or we deal with any epidemic, coming at any sort of regular disease that returns to the public. We don't do free testing for everything else. It simply isn't sustainable. And what people have to remember, no government has any money. It's our money, and we want that money spent on other things. There's parts of the NHS budget that will lose money if it goes up, if we continue with free testing. Also, if it doesn't come out of the NHS budget, it will come out of somewhere else. And anybody who's in favour of a continuation of free testing should just merely tell us where the money's coming from.
Sean, thank you. I really want to know your views on this. Is it too soon to lift COVID restrictions? Perhaps you welcome the move as a way to restore our freedoms. What are you hoping he says in that press conference later? Personally, I think we need a big firework display and a bank holiday to celebrate 2 years, over 2 years of these restrictions, and apparently we're out of it. Where's the fanfare? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews so I can find out what you, the nation, really thinks. You're with GB News on TV and radio. It's time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast. Fingers crossed.
Hello. Storm Franklin is clearing away, but we do still have a Met Office yellow warning in place until the early afternoon. Still very windy out there, and still the potential for damaging gusts through the late morning, early afternoon. There is that storm system starting to ebb away, and the isobar is just slowly opening out. So the winds will continue to ease through the rest of today, but it's still going to be a very windy day. For many, it'll be bright out there this afternoon. Quite a bit of cloud over the Midlands, East Anglia through the early afternoon. A few showers likely here, but otherwise it is mostly dry and many places seeing sunny spells. But it is still windy. Those winds just continuing to ease down a little bit through the afternoon. Temperature-wise, double digits for many across England and Wales, and even further north, above average across Scotland. But obviously it doesn't feel that mild because it is still very windy. As the winds ease off further, we could see some pockets of frost across northeast Scotland. Turns quite chilly across eastern England overnight with clear skies, but the next set of weather fronts will move in from the west, bringing rain and drizzle, and eventually they'll start to lift the temperatures. So certainly in the west, we're well above freezing by dawn. But some more heavy rain and strong winds come into western Scotland in the morning. That rain will spread southwards. Could be very heavy for a time across northwest England, North Wales, particularly through Tuesday morning's rush hour. That band of rain kind of eases off as it spreads southwards, so a spell of damp weather for the Midlands and then East Anglia in the southeast through the early afternoon before skies start to brighten and we see sunny spells. A few showers across western Scotland, in particular over the hills. There will be of snow here, but again, for many it turns quite bright, but still quite breezy in the afternoon. Through Tuesday evening, we'll see a few more of those showers coming into Northern Ireland, northwest England, particularly western Scotland, with more snow on the hills. Clearer spells further south, and the weather continuing to chop and change this week. It'll often be windy, but not as stormy. There'll be spells of rain, but also most of us will see some sunnier days as well. Goodbye.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Another day and another named storm looms over the UK, whipping up disruption in its wake. This time, it's Franklin's turn to show us what he's got, with his weapon of choice being flooding, while continuing Eunice's predilection for blasting the land with 100-mile-an-hour winds. For millions, there are continued severe delays to travel, while tens of thousands remain without power, and warnings are placed on rivers up and down the country, threatening to burst their banks. Britain's big weather battle is far from over, as sandbags are stacked, flights are grounded, and the Met Office describes it as an unprecedented weather event to warrant 3 named storms in only a week. Well, let's talk to GB News North West of England reporter who is in Didsbury. Bradley, what's the situation like up there?
Well, Alex, the situation is pretty dire. As you can see, I'm here at Didsbury Sports Ground. Just take a look at the building there. You can actually see almost the level of water that was originally at a very great height. For those listening on radio, I'm currently surrounded by tons of water that normally is an area where people are playing football, playing all kinds of sports, but instead it looks like a swimming pool. The way up some of the rugby posts was once halfway up the garage door. It's now settled a bit, but you can almost still get a sense that the wind is still picking up. That yellow warning for wind was actually at an end at 1 o'clock this afternoon, but the Environment Agency have throughout the past 24 hours been issuing flood warnings. Here in Didsbury, as you can see, flooding has certainly had an impact, not just for the sports ground, but for the allotment here as well, Alex. Many people who have an allotment site have been coming down to visit and assess the damage. Lorraine, you're one of those people.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
Well, sad that it's all flooded, obviously, but and I wanted to come and see what damage had been done to my allotment, but can't get through because the water's too deep. But it's better that the allotments get flooded than people's homes, and the flood basin is used as it should be.
And this isn't the first time this has happened here in Didsbury, is it?
No, this is well, it's getting more frequent. It happened last year very badly, and it's happened quite a few times in the last sort of like 20 years. So yeah.
And Lorraine, you've got relatives and members of family who live also in Didsbury, one of which was asked to evacuate. What's the situation been like there?
Well, it's very worrying when you're asked to evacuate because you're not sure, whether the flooding is actually going to affect you. But fortunately, the floodgates were opened and the water was diverted, so they managed to stay in the house.
Well, Lorraine, I'm sorry we have to talk under these circumstances. I hope you can get your allotment site back up and running. You can see more damage here, a tree that has completely been thrown over the fence and broken it entirely. This is just a snapshot of the damage here in Didsbury. Other parts of South Manchester are facing more impact. Of course, winds are dying down. The rainfall has died down, but certainly there's a big clean-up operation underway and will be for the next few weeks.
Thank you so much for giving us that update from the northwest there, Bradley. Well, Alex Deacon, the meteorologist at the Met Office, the one and only, joins me now. Alex, great to have you back on. So what's going on? Unprecedented weather event with 3 named storms in just 1 week.
Yeah, I mean, we've only been naming storms since 2015, but yeah, we've never done 3 in a week before. We named 2 last Monday. We've never named 2 on the same day before either. So yeah, an unusual week of weather driven by a very active jet stream, that fast-moving ribbon of air high up in the atmosphere that supercharges our atmosphere at times, and it's just been particularly powerful over the past week. Picked up 3 of these low-pressure systems and sent them our way as really intense storms. So we've not seen it before, and it has been very, very lively, as we've been seeing. Dangerous conditions at times. Staying lively this week, but hopefully now not as stormy.
I mean, it seems to me that Franklin's particular secret weapon is going to be flooding. Now, someone who's grown up on the banks of the River Severn, this is not unusual to me, and probably not unusual to many parts of the country. It's a problem, actually, that the UK is just not very good at dealing with this, rather than it being a completely unprecedented event.
I think in terms of rainfall, we didn't see anything too exceptional from the most recent storm, Franklin. It's a cumulative effect there, right? To get 3 storms in a row, each of them bringing some rain, although rain wasn't really the story with Dudley or with Eunice. They were both really about winds. And Franklin has also been about the winds as well. But yeah, that cumulative effect certainly caused some issues, the persistent nature of that rainfall. And of course, as we see these storms over the years, they are going to pack more of a punch in terms of rainfall, and we're more likely to see flooding as we see more extremes due to climate change. So yes, we do need to prepare more for these more extremes.
Now, I know that as a weatherman, you're going to be quite cautious about projecting too far ahead, but when can we look forward to all of this being over and having the sunshine back?
June. No, I think this week is still lively, as I said, but we're not going to have as many storms, certainly this week. Could still have a few issues on Thursday, actually, with strong winds and potentially some snow across the northwest. But overall, this week, calmer, but far from calm. There will be further spells of rain, which won't be good news for particularly people of Didsbury, but other areas that are susceptible to flooding at the moment. But I think that the rain is going to move through quite quickly this week, so that is good news. It's going to stay windy, but not as windy. But again, things have been weakened by these 3 storms in a week, so it may not necessarily take a stronger gust to cause some further issues. But generally, the way that looks a little calmer, and certainly as we go into the end and towards next week, particularly across the southeastern quarter of the UK, the weather does look a bit calmer with high pressure at least trying to move in temporarily.
Well, let's hope it tries hard enough to get fully in here, because I'm missing the sunshine, I'll tell you that much. Alex, thank you very much. Delighted to speak to you, as always. Have you been affected by the bad weather over the past few days? Are you sandbagging as we speak? Do get in touch and let us know what's happened. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio, but first it's time for a check on the news headlines. We are just waiting now for the news headlines to take place. Oh no, we're going to talk to Sean. Hiya, Sean. Well, thank the Lord you're here. Sometimes things don't always go right in newsrooms. You know, it's funny, I asked Alex Deakin the question earlier whether or not these weather events are as unprecedented as people are making out. I mean, he's been dominating the news headlines for the last week. Is it just the fact that we are now a very risk-averse country?
I think there's two things I have to say here. First, we are obsessed with the weather. It's a very British thing to discuss the weather. So if anything unusual happens, you can guarantee it's going to be all over everywhere. And of course, if you're someone who's been affected by the wind, blowing a tree down, crushing your car, smashing up your garden, or in my wife's case, ruining the school farm, you are alive to these things. But I think it has to be said, generally speaking, we are quite well prepared, and our infrastructure in this country is very good. And that's why if a piece of it breaks, we automatically notice it. But yes, we are risk averse. If any little thing happens, we act like it's the end of the world. And I think we should stop that, because if we're correct, and climate change is going to bring more weather events, in order for us to deal with them, we need to not be averse to the risk, we need to plan for that risk. And that means local authorities taking charge, national government taking charge. Currently, I'd argue we have quite a good record on that, but of course it could be improved.
Sure, thank you. And I bet you're looking forward to the good weather as well. Well, we do have time for the news headlines now, so let's throw it to Rosie.
Good afternoon, it is 2:32. I'm Rosie Wright here to keep you up to date on GB News. A cabinet meeting in which Boris Johnson was due to outline his blueprint for living with COVID to his colleagues has been delayed until later on this afternoon. Ministers have been seen arriving in Number 10 ahead of the now postponed meeting. The Prime Minister was expected to remove all remaining domestic COVID regulations in England by the end of this week. We'll keep you updated on that. Now, union leaders have criticised potential government plans to charge for COVID tests, calling it an act of madness. The TUC is urging the Prime Minister put public health first ahead of internal party politics. They claim it will disproportionately hit frontline and low-paid workers during a time when the cost of living is on the rise. Environment agencies have issued hundreds of alerts for flooding as Storm Franklin continues to sweep across the UK. It follows yellow weather warnings that have been in place since this morning, but have now been removed. Transport networks have been suffering further delays, with some train operators asking passengers not to travel because of conditions. 32,000 homes are still without power following Storm Eunice over the weekend. The Prime Minister's spokesman says intelligence suggests Russia intends to launch an invasion of Ukraine and that President Putin's plan has, in effect, already begun. Downing Street added that a window for diplomacy still remains to prevent war in Europe. US President Joe Biden has agreed, in principle, to talks with Vladimir Putin as long as Russia holds off on an attack. The Kremlin says there are no concrete plans, but both leaders could meet in person or speak. You're now up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Shortly, we'll be back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, welcome back. And let's go back to that story about Storm Franklin and the continued battering of the British Isles by freak weather events. I'm joined now by founder and director of Sandy Mama's Kitchen, Eva Patel, whose business has been impacted by the storms over the weekend. Eva, how bad has the weather affected you?
It's caused havoc. Thank you for having me on. Yes, so we run a mobile outdoor catering company and we cook pizzas and barbecue items outside. So cooking in this weather has just been a disaster, and we actually had to cancel a large event on Friday night when the storm was at its worst. Obviously, the client was disappointed, but after talking to them about the risks and the safety of her guests as well as ours and our team, it was the best decision to do.
And this is going to take a huge amount of effort now for a recovery.
In terms of our business, so luckily we didn't manage to damage any of our equipment or things when we were catering earlier in the week. And hopefully our client will book us again in time. But it just shows that a lot of small businesses do still work outdoors and in all kinds of weather, especially seasonal events companies, and it does take an effect on them, definitely, especially those weather-dependent companies.
Eva, thank you ever so much for joining us, and good luck sorting out all of the damage in the wake of all the various storms that have happened. Sean, have you been impacted by these storms?
Well, my wife runs a school farm, so there's been a lot of things blown away. So I'll be up tomorrow repairing roofs and etc. and rehousing the chickens, etc. But I think that's the problem, isn't it? For some of us, it's had absolutely no impact at all. And you can only look on Twitter and people posting funny pictures of a bin being blown over. But then you speak to a small business owner who's had a major event removed, which is her income. And that's the thing. When it comes to weather, you have to plan for it. But of course, there's always the X factor of the effect it will have. You look at the train companies, for instance, they've been doing reasonably well. But if they get a tree on the line, they have to stop. If there's any worry that a train could be pushed one way or the other, they have to stop. And that has a real impact on potentially thousands of people. So that planning piece becomes very important. And I think as a nation, we've been reasonably good when you look at sort of big coastal flooding issues, or if you live near the Severn, you know it's going to burst its banks and you prepare for it. I think it's sometimes this X factor, this ad hoc planning that catches us on the hop. But on the whole, I think we've been lucky with these two big storms, Eunice, and now I forget what the new one's called. What's it called, the new one? Franklin. I think Eunice we've survived. Let's see how Franklin goes, because we haven't had too many deaths or anything along those lines, which is the ultimate thing that goes wrong. But I think as a country, we are prepared, but we've always got to be prepared to take that risk and still try to get our business up, still try to get to work, etc., etc.
Sean, thank you. Won't be long until we get Storm Sean, I'm sure. Enough of them battering the country, right? Now, last-ditch efforts to de-escalate the perilous situation in Ukraine could take place this week as French President Emmanuel Macron claims to have brokered a tête-à-tête between Putin and Biden on condition that Russia does not make a move on its neighbour, although the Kremlin has since poured cold water on the proposals. Meanwhile, over the weekend, US Vice President Kamala Harris told world leaders at the annual global security meeting in Munich that Putin has decided to invade, period, amidst American intelligence warnings that troop numbers amount to almost 200,000, dwarfing Ukraine's sizable resistance. As European countries begin to lay out plans to potentially have to take in refugees, while many also question the kickback of proposed sanctions on their own economies, military experts warn of Russia's vice-like grip on Ukraine with air, sea, land and cyber attack power. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has blasted EU countries for their ambivalent attitude towards his nation, saying those who don't stand by Ukraine should think about karma, calling for preemptive sanctions against Moscow and demanding security guarantees flying in the face of Macron's conciliatory tone, suggesting NATO could promise to never permit membership to Kiev. Europe in conflict with itself, bringing the continent perilously closer to the brink of actual war. This is not about the war in Ukraine, this is about a war in Europe, he added. Well, joining me now on the show is journalist Mircea Babu, who is in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. What's the situation currently like there? I mean, Twitter is awash with rumours that an attack could be imminent as early as tomorrow morning.
Good afternoon. Indeed, here in Kiev at the moment, we have all sorts of rumors panicking the population. If 2, 3, 4 days ago, people will brush off the worry of war and they will optimistically say nothing will happen, the atmosphere changed in the last 24, 48 hours dramatically. People are significantly worried, and they are looking now at possibilities to evacuate more than they did in the past. Now, there's also been a breach of a ceasefire, about 80 breaches recorded by international observers, and those observers claim that 72 of those breaches have been with weapons that are prohibited by the Minsk agreement. Both sides are actually accusing each other of instigating and escalating the conflict. Just hours ago, we had Russian media reporting that Ukrainian soldiers were caught in Rostov, a Russian city, with the intent of putting explosives, as they claim, in the city and targeting civilians. On the other hand, Ukrainians are saying no such event took place and they do not engage in any escalations. But what is sure here in Kiev and throughout the country, as I'm heading east at the moment, is that people are significantly worried about what's coming next.
And do you think has led to that change of heart? Because, I mean, just before the weekend, there was speculation that this could just be power projection by Vladimir Putin. Is this the fact that there are all these false flag events taking place, or it seems that, tensions are rising in particularly those contested areas?
Well, I think it's a mix of three things. First of all, we have the international community, namely US and the UK, saying for sure there will be an attack. So people here look at the US, look at the UK. They do trust what the politicians say more than they do sometimes here in Ukraine or Eastern Europe in general. So that's one thing. On the other hand, we actually had some events here in the last 72 hours. We had some explosions. We had some loss of lives in the Ukrainian army and wounded people. And we did have a major escalation in terms of armed incidents in Eastern Ukraine. And let's not forget, like you said, the false flag operations. We see more and more videos coming out on both sides, allegedly accusing one or the other, allegedly accusing each other of conflict and accusing each other of engaging in a military conflict. And last but not least, we had something that did worry everyone here in Ukraine, was the evacuation of Donbas, the two republics, the two so-called autonomous republics, who were evacuating their civilians to Russia. So that obviously worried people throughout Ukraine.
Mircea, thank you ever so much for giving us an update live from Kiev there. It's wonderful having you on the programme, and do stay safe. Meanwhile, in the last hour, the Russian ambassador to the UK has criticised the UK's approach to the crisis and singled out the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss.
Of course, we see all these diplomatic telephone calls, visits to each other, endless visits to each other, endless conversation. But I will see no UK role in search of constructive solution. Those who are doing it is President Macron, Chancellor of Germany. They are doing this. But as for UK, I'm saying nothing. And I'm also judging from Liz Truss' visit to Moscow. She didn't listen to the arguments. She tried to be deaf to the arguments. She was operating by a small number of slogans and tweets. So what for it is? What's the use of it?
Well, we're joined now by our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, you almost have a sense, don't you, that if Russia's criticising Liz Truss, she must be doing something right.
Well, that's certainly how Liz Truss will see it, and I'm sure a number of people, in particularly the Parliamentary Conservative Party, will see it that way as well, although it has to be said that when Liz Truss did make her visit to Moscow, there were a number of journalists in the United Kingdom who were sort of taking what the Russian Foreign Secretary was saying as read, sort of swallowing the lines of the Kremlin, which I found pretty extraordinary. No, when it comes to what Moscow says, we need to take it with a big dose of salt or of anything. I mean, with what we need to treat an enemy, and frankly, when we're talking in this situation, this is an enemy. This is a country that has piled up troops and weaponry, even field hospitals on the border of Ukraine. And so when we listen to what they say, we need to take it with that pinch of salt. We need to take it with a much greater degree of scepticism than many people are applying.
I mean, for those who have been paying attention, extraordinary comments coming out of that Munich conference over the weekend, and notably from the Ukrainian president himself, Volodymyr Zelensky, essentially saying about EU members that, you know, karma be on your shoulders. Now is the time to stand with Ukraine. You had President Emmanuel Macron showboating, saying, well, we're the ones who's going to de-escalate this. Second time round, he's done that, claiming to have set up a tete-a-tete, which the Kremlin have now poured cold water on. And you've also got Lithuania's foreign minister talking about Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania all going Kiev together and saying to some other EU politicians, you too should be standing with Ukraine. How much of this do you think has been fuelled by certain members of the EU, certain other European countries having a more conciliatory tone with Russia?
Well, I think it certainly hasn't helped, particularly the position of Germany, which has been singled out by Zelensky in recent days. They've sent a number of helmets to the Ukrainians to help, but the Ukrainians didn't ask for helmets, they asked for weaponry, and the Germans have refused to send any weaponry as it stands. Actually, there's a bit of a division now within the Bundestag because the CDU, which is now out of power, has now been starting to call for weaponry to be sent to Ukraine, but that has not yet happened from the current governing coalition. Of course, the Brits sent anti-tank missiles really early in this process. I think it's fair to say that the British response has been one of the strongest in response to Russia. The French response, though, is potentially the most intriguing. Macron, of course, is leading up to an election in a few months' time. He's fighting against a number of opponents on the far right and the far left who are really quite isolationist, or indeed even going as far as pro-Russian in their outlook, wanting to pull France out of NATO, for example. And Macron has that to contend with when it comes to trying to present France as a more neutral arbiter. However, the question is, has France been played by Putin in the last 12 hours? It looks like that is potentially the case. We don't know if this summit is going to go ahead or not. And if Macron went out and his Elysee Palace went out this morning to say they've organised this grand summit between the Americans and the Russians and it doesn't go ahead, well, that makes him look all the weaker.
Yeah, I mean, Sean, it is an interesting picture, isn't it? There might be people watching this right now saying, well, we should be more like France and Germany, who are protecting their own economic interests, who don't want to see reprisals happening on their own shores if they did intervene. Do you think that our response is the correct one, or does it risk being a little bit chest-thumping, which could potentially be perilous for the UK?
I think as a country, as Europe, we want to stop a very strident Russia that's constantly pushing the order, trying to change the shape of the map. So our response, I think, is the correct one. Along with Poland, we signed with Ukraine to say we would come to your defence, we would help you. And that has materialised, and that's real. I think Putin has often outmanoeuvred Europe by drawing a line in the sand and not moving. And initially, it looked like Europe were going to take him on, slightly weakened by the Germany piece, because, of course, Germany has the Nord Stream 2 pipeline they'd like to get off the ground with Russia going forward, and they'll be in a corner if they can't work with Russia. So they've had to manoeuvre themselves back. But it goes back to one of the core challenges for Europe. It can be hard to represent your own nation's outcomes and also European outcomes as well. And I think that's where Germany are trapped, and also France as well. And traditionally, Russia has used that to get a big forward step. Their big problem now is the likes of Poland and Britain, and importantly America, have said, you will go no further, we will step in and stop you. And I think that's why the Ukrainians feel so emboldened to say to other European nations, where are you? You talk the talk, now let's see you walk the walk.
Sean, thank you. Tom, thank you very much. It does make you cast doubt, doesn't it, on all of those rumours that Putin really wanted Brexit. I mean, it hasn't worked out so well when it comes to our particularly strident foreign policy. Now, moving on, Tinder for teens, a prospect that should make any parent shudder who even has an inkling of the sort of traffic that regularly takes place on the infamous dating app. Well, a little-known platform called YouView has caused controversy by offering a similar service, but for minors. With over 20 million users worldwide and numbering thousands in the UK, YouView allows teenagers to connect and interact. But what was perhaps designed to be innocent has, unsurprisingly, become a dangerous cesspit of grooming, solicitation and self-harm, with underage users being bombarded with requests for news and meetups for sex, while other chats deluge kids with tips on suicide and drug use. The French company behind the app has expressed dismay at the findings, saying user safety is paramount, while minors need permission from a parent to subscribe. As the UK government draws up what it claims will be world-leading legislation to make the internet safe for kids, how radical will proposals have to be to make this even remotely possible? Well, Sean Bailey is still with me, so let's have a chat with him, what he thinks about this. I mean, I just don't know what can be put in place now to protect kids online. It seems to me that, you know, there's new apps springing up everywhere. Is age verification going to do anything when you've got platforms like this saying, you know, just have a guardian sign up for you?
Firstly, YouView, absolutely no. As a father of two young, I have one who's 12 and one who's 14, there's no way they'd build this app. And anybody who thought it wasn't going to descend to the situation it's in now was deluding themselves. You only have to look at all the other apps to show where it was going to end. When it comes to legislation, the legislation will have to be pretty draconian to make any real impact. But there's two ways it can work. Firstly, it must hold IP, internet providers, and much more hold them to the flame, and also the people who write these apps. They write the app, release it out into the wild, and then wander off, claim all the money, but claim none of the responsibility. We must legally make them feel it financially. That's the only thing that will motivate these people to change their behaviour. And the second piece, of course, we've got to educate parents. Because you know, a rainy Tuesday afternoon, you're trying to cook dinner, the kids pile in, sign this off, Daddy, sign this off, Mummy, you will. You will. You'll have a look at it, you flick through, make sure nothing's wrong, and then you'll sign off because you're busy, you're trying to make ends meet, you're trying to work. And then your child is now locked in a universe that they can't handle and that you'll never see. So there's two things here. There's a responsibility to the government, and they should go as draconian as they need to. There's a responsibility on us all as parents to just constantly having a conversation with my friends about how much privacy my children are allowed. I personally think when you're a minor, your level of privacy should be pretty low.
I mean, I'm glad you said that the government should be very draconian on this. I mean, that's something I fully agree with. I just don't think they will be. From the bits and bobs we've heard coming out already, it was going to be called online harms, now it's online safety. You hear about, well, age verification, there's already a hoo-ha over that. I mean, that's the bare minimum you would think when it comes to minors accessing adult content. Do you think that the current Conservative government are the ones to really stand up for small c conservative values and say to the World Wide Web, to say to .com, this ends now. This must be really regulated for the sake of public health?
Look, if you ask me, of course I'm going to say yes. But actually, I think it goes beyond the Conservative government. It goes even beyond Parliament. The reason governments, MPs are leaning back on this is because of the tirade of Liberals saying, no, you can't censor, you can't this and you can't that. I had a conversation recently with a little elderly lady and we were talking about Mary Whitehouse. And for your younger viewers, you won't remember Mary Whitehouse, but she was always about, basically don't let us see anything that's slightly untoward. But the point that this elderly lady meant to me, she said this, she said, if you haven't seen enough pornography and violence by the time you're 21, we can sit you in a room and give it all to you. But if you've seen too much by the time you're 16, it's too late. And I think that's the premise we should take in to not only the legislation that we're drawing up, but to deal with our own children and also these Liberals. Liberals have to look at censorship, as you would see it, I would see it as maybe protection for our children, because the mental health of our children in this country has suffered severely, and it hasn't just been because of lockdown.
Sean, I couldn't agree with you more, I must admit. I'd like to consider myself a modern-day Mary Whitehouse. Well, that's all we have time for today on We Need to Talk About. Do join me again tomorrow, same time, same place from 2 o'clock on GB News. But for me, have a lovely afternoon and evening and stay safe in that weather.
Hello. Storm Franklin is clearing away, but we do still have a Met Office yellow warning in place until the early afternoon. Still very windy out there and still the potential for damaging gusts through the late morning, early afternoon. There is that storm system starting to ebb away and the isobars just slowly opening out. So the winds will continue to ease through the rest of today, but it's still going to be a very windy day. For many, it'll be bright out there this afternoon. Quite a bit of cloud over the Midlands, East Anglia through the early afternoon. A few showers likely here, but otherwise it is mostly dry and many places seeing sunny spells. But it is still windy. Those winds just continuing to ease down a little bit through the afternoon. Temperature-wise, double digits for many across England and Wales, and even further north, above average across Scotland. But obviously it doesn't feel that mild because it is still very windy. As the winds ease off further, we could see some pockets of frost across northeast Scotland. Turns quite chilly across eastern England overnight with clear skies, but the next set of weather fronts will move in from the west, bringing rain and drizzle, and eventually they'll start to lift the temperatures. So certainly in the west, we're well above freezing by dawn. But some more heavy rain and strong winds come into western Scotland in the morning. That rain will spread southwards, could be very heavy for a time across northwest England, North Wales, particularly through Tuesday morning's rush hour. That band of rain kind of eases off as it spreads southwards, so a spell of damp weather for the Midlands and then East Anglia in the southeast through the early afternoon before skies start to brighten and we see sunny spells. A few showers across western Scotland, in particular over the hills. There will be of snow here, but again, for many it turns quite bright, but still quite breezy in the afternoon. Through Tuesday evening, we'll see a few more of those showers coming into Northern Ireland, northwest England, particularly western Scotland, with more snow on the hills, clearer spells further south, and the weather continuing to chop and change this week. It'll often be windy, but not as stormy. There'll be spells of rain, but also most of us will see some sunnier days as well. Goodbye.